Welcome back. I have Keely Henninger joining me back on the podcast, a return from episode 42, about 200 episodes ago. So Keely, thanks so much for taking some time to chat. I'm excited to dig back in here with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and congrats on reaching like 240 episodes. That's pretty cool.
Thank you. So the first question of this podcast has evolved or has become pretty consistent because at first I really just didn't want to do intros, and then it turned into a pretty fun question. The question is, who is Keely?
Oh, that's a fun question. I am a professional trail runner who lives in Portland, Oregon, and I've been running in the space for about 7 or 8 years now. So I've been in trail running for a while. And I am also a scientist in my spare time and do a lot of research with fellow scientists in the area to really cover some of the bigger issues around fueling and body image and low energy availability in the sport of running and sport of trail running specifically, with hopes to one day become a physician and be able to take that knowledge a step further and actually apply it to my clients and my patients.
That's amazing. I've known you since probably 2015, and you've done a whole lot of awesome things over that time. And it's been really cool to watch your story evolve and watch your journey progress from where you were working to going back to school and learning, and being a coach and coaching yourself, and all these little bits and pieces that together build up to your story. I guess to start, I'm curious, you've taken some big swings and big risks and bets on yourself, maybe is a better way to put it. Have you always been like that? Has that always been something that you're, I don't want to say comfortable with, but has it always been something that you do?
That's a really good question. I used to take a lot of really small bets on myself, as in I would only go like 80% in on the bet, right? So it felt a lot easier to be like, oh, I'm going to try to be a good trail runner, but I don't do it full time. I'm going to try to be the best scientist I can be, but I don't do it full time. It's like all these things where you keep adding layers onto the package, and all of a sudden you're doing a lot of really good things, but you're not putting yourself all in on anything. So it's like you're a master of all, you're good at all things, but you're not like a master of nothing, right? And so I actually kind of finally realized that I wasn't doing anything to let myself reach my potential. And it kind of came at a crossroads for me where I knew I wanted to go back to school. And I know, going back to medical school will require 100% of myself. And so luckily, I found an opportunity to be able to run full time kind of in my pursuit of that degree. And so, I have 2.5 years to play with before I start school. And so I found that as an opportunity to finally go, mostly all in on running, which is really cool and will allow myself to, see my actual limits. And yeah, it's definitely scary because I think when you go all in on something, the stakes of failure feel a lot higher, even though they might be lower because you're actually able to, invest more of yourself into it. But yeah, it's definitely intimidating because I'm used to like busying myself with a lot of different things and having those as fall safes if something goes wrong. And now it's kind of like, okay, this is me and I don't have excuses for things that go poorly. And so it's been a nice journey.
You're pretty public with your journey on social, whether that's with your relationship with food or DNFing. Do you feel some sort of pressure to perform and compete, especially given the fact that running is how you are supporting yourself now? I mean, you also have a podcast, you have sponsors on your podcast, you have sponsors outside of like strictly performance related, but I'm curious how you handle the pressure and how you how you if you feel that kind of pressure, and then how you handle
it. Yeah, I mean, it would be silly of me to say that I don't feel any pressure. Obviously, I put all myself into running, and so I clearly have, high expectations for myself and feel a little bit of pressure to perform for my sponsors. But I think, honestly, while I've been having more time to train and to, harness all this fitness and be able to actually recover and treat your body right and feel really good in the sport, that pressure becomes a little less because running becomes the easy part. And so while obviously, the sport of trail running is becoming more and more competitive, and it's a lot harder to, get a golden ticket to Western States or to podium at these big races, I do feel that when it comes to running, for the most part, I don't feel quite as much pressure as maybe I used to, because I know the training is there. I know I've done as much as I can. And running, like this year going into Western States, the running was the easiest part. I was like, I just want to start running because that's what I've been doing so much of for the last 4 months. And, all of the hype around the race and the media calls and the interviews and all that feels a little bit more stressful than the actual running and the performance, because I know on a given day, all the things that I can control into effect. Like I can put myself out there and run a pretty stellar race, at least to my own ability. So that part, while it's definitely there because I want to perform well, it doesn't feel quite as stressful as I thought it would be.
I love that. I want to talk about Western State in particular. I saw you at Forest Hill, so 100K, right where your race ended. You were talking to your crew and to your friends and to your partner, and it was just like a real raw moment that I don't think people can appreciate unless they've like been so involved in the journey and like seen everything or seen many things. And to see how you responded in that moment and then the coming days was really cool. I'm curious your relationship with, I hesitate to use the word failure, but like not achieving the goal, right? The goal on the day is always execute to the best of your ability. Sometimes it's to win or podium or whatnot. I'm curious your relationship with that word on that day and in general.
Yeah. So I think, you're absolutely right. For a while and right in the instant, and at that instance, I did view it as a 100% failure, right? Because my goal was to, podium, potentially win Western States, and, hiking out of the second canyon, going into Michigan Bluff, which is actually where I dropped mile 55 and a half. I was like, faced with this realization that I wasn't going to finish. I couldn't run. And so that was really, really horrible. And at the time it did feel like a failure, but I think luckily we get to think about things later, right? And we get to think about how maybe it wasn't a full failure and how to take those learnings and take them forward and move on. And so while it was probably one of the hardest days of my life, at least, as of now, it definitely was something that in retrospect, I learned a lot from. And so at the day, I feel like I really just embraced the feelings of failure, and I was really open with, crying, which I'm not a crier, and just feeling all the feels because it was just very awful. And I wasn't expecting to get to that spot, like I had planned out the race and there was no, option where that happened. And so for that to be what happened, I was just so shocked because that's not anything that I had planned for. But looking back, I now can at least view that day as a 100% success in the fact that the goals that I had outside of the monumental goal of winning or running my fastest race were to, stay really true to myself, to listen to my crew and not be stubborn, to fuel as well as I can, and to run within my ability and not let other people, impact how I'm running, how fast I'm running, how slow I'm running, all of that. And honestly, up until mile 55, I did all of those things. And so at the end of the day, the race was a raging success because I've never executed that well in a race in my life. And so knowing I can do that is really important. And so now it's more like, okay, it's a good reminder that in the sport of trail and ultra running, there's always an element of like something that's outside of our control. And so being reminded of that was pretty good because you do have to remind yourself that there is something that can go wrong sometimes. And so, while it wasn't easy, I still don't think it was 100% failure anymore, which is good.
What was the most surprising part of the next 48 hours for you?
I think The most surprising part of the next 48 hours for me was just how raw it stayed. I thought that I had come far enough along in my running journey to de-identify myself with my success. And, 48 hours and beyond, it still was just so raw that I just felt this sense of failure, right? This sense that I can't believe something out of my control stopped me. And this is like a big failure to me. And so I think it was this combination of failure and being really just shocked about something happening that didn't feel inside my control. And that, that happened, that stayed in my mind for a really long time.
How did you turn it around and get to a point where you could feel that it was a success?
I think it took like months of self-introspection and a lot of like being angry at my partner and being angry at myself and overtraining on the bike. And, kind of, it's funny. I was talking about this with someone the other day, and, we can preach all we want and we can learn a lot, right? And I think that I've learned a lot as an athlete and as a human. And I'm able to speak to a lot of my previous experiences and use them to, hopefully help others and also help myself in my own journey. But I will say that this injury, because it felt so unexpected and it was so demoralizing, it really like set me back a little bit. And I had to relearn some of the things that I've, learned in the past and also teach others about. And so it was almost very eye-opening to, find myself really treading water, trying to keep my head above water during this injury recovery, at least for the first month, where I like totally lost my direction and my sense of identity, because I think I did put so much of myself into this. And so I think it took like a month of really suffering to finally acknowledge that I was really not doing well. Have some pretty serious conversations with my partner and to, start talking with a therapist to really start to understand that I wasn't over this and that I really needed to address it to be able to move on. And that I needed to reevaluate my relationship with running yet again, even though I thought I nailed that down a while ago, to put it in its place and to acknowledge that, I'm okay without it, that I'm not, my confidence shouldn't lay on my running ability, especially my confidence in other avenues in my life. And so, yeah, it didn't happen overnight. It was a pretty crummy month or two after the race. But I relearned and kind of reprioritized some stuff and was able to view it as a success, I'd say.
Very cool. What are you most excited about for 2023? Looking ahead.
For 2023, I'm most excited to try to get a golden ticket back to Western States. It's definitely, I wouldn't consider myself a 100-mile guru at all. I've only ran one. But that race is probably my favorite race. The community there is absolutely insane. The trails are really fast and flowy. They really play to my strengths. And I love the competition. There's so many stellar women that go race. So it's really just keeps you on your toes. You get to really race some of the best in the world. And so trying to get myself back there would be, the best case scenario. And just try to have fun and run true to myself along the way. So yeah, that's I
think a thing that a lot of people are curious about is the dynamic amongst the women's field, where so many of you are friends. I guess the same is true in the men's field, but perhaps not as much. How do you rectify or compartmentalize the fact that you're racing your friends and you want them to do well, but you might also want to beat them?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one. And you can get caught up in the race pretty easily to, acknowledge that someone may be, faster than you. So you back off, or slower than you. So you try to run ahead of them. But I think that, at least in my mind, friendships are the most important part for 50K. And you can, chat with other females. You can really not care about how they're running, but really just be stoked for them to be out there and to be pushing themselves. And then I'd say as you get closer to 50 mile to 100K, you're viewing them as competitors. And so while you also really want them to succeed, you also know that they are a phenomenal athlete and they're going to push you to your best ability as well. And so I think that part is really exciting. And that's where it becomes really competitive, because you want them to do well, but you also really want to be able to push yourself to do better than them, because you know that they're a phenomenal athlete and that they can push you to that next level. And so while obviously supporting each other is paramount to everything else, obviously competition is why we're all there. And so really pushing yourself to your best ability to, push yourself against these women is why we're there. And doesn't take away anything from the camaraderie. We're all there to support each other, push each other, and get the best out of ourselves.
Love that. Let's rewind it back to like 2014, 15, 16. I think your experience as a runner in those years and the experiences you had in those years, and you've done a lot of writing on those years. So maybe we'll link to that in the show notes. I'm thinking specifically of the Trail Sisters article and a couple of others. Talk to me about how your relationship with running evolved over those years around food, around your body, and specifically like how you navigated that. I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to your story, and maybe some of them are in it right now. So I kind of want to see it or hear it within that lens of like, you're talking to someone who may be going through. First, do you want to give a little background on what those years were like for you?
Sure. Yeah. So, I started running not very early in my life. So I didn't start running competitively until around 2013, 2014. And, my first narrative around running was extremely different than all the other narratives I had in my sporting background. And so when I played soccer and basketball, the narrative was, be the best athlete you can be, period. Like just push yourself, kind of all body types welcome, all training philosophies welcome. It was just like, we want the stellar athletes and you're going to push yourself, and that's that. And so when I started running, the first narrative I was given was that if you could train hard enough to lose your menstrual cycle, then you were succeeding, right? And so all of the women that I met initially were saying that they had lost their cycle, and that was kind of their barometer of success. And, I feel like as a young 19, 20-year-old, I didn't know any better. And I wanted to be really good at the sport because I'm a competitive person. And so seeing women who are faster than me say this or do this, kind of put that in my mind for the beginning of my career. And so, while I had some early success, I was never feeling that great during any of my races. So from like 2014 to 2017, the first like 3 years of my racing career, it was very sporadic. It was a lot of ups and downs of like, oh, a really great race. Oh, a really poor race. Oh, a great race, a poor race, great race, poor race. And that cycle continued until it became a lot more poor races than good races. And at that time, I was chasing this ideal still of like, I must get my body to as small as it can be and continue to not have my cycle, because that was my badge of honor. That was my barometer of success. My barometer of success was not, how fast I'm running or how I did in races. It was those two things, which are not indicative of performance, right? So I was neglecting my actual success and my performance and my health by tracing these ideals that didn't matter. And so, around 2017, I just started feeling terrible. Luckily, around then, I got into contact with you guys from my coach at the time and started doing some blood tests. And I think at that point, because I'm so scientifically minded, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And so seeing that, a lot of my biomarkers were completely out of whack, and that I was, being diagnosed by all of my doctors with all these crazy disorders because they had no clue what was going on.
Right.
I realized slowly, like, I needed to start to change. And so I started working with a nutritionist. I started working more closely with you guys, and like emphasis on slowly, very slowly started to change my habits. Now that did not happen overnight, right? Like I'd say I slowly started increasing my fueling like outside of working out, which slowly started transferring to me fueling more during my workouts and during my races. So coming into 2018, while I still was like really training hard and probably overdoing it in the training and racing realm, I at least was starting to actually fuel to recover and during my races, which ultimately ended up in a really stellar end of 2017, 2018 season. However, at that time, I still hadn't nailed the training piece, and I still was, working full time and trying to hit these crazy numbers of my mileage every week of like, okay, I need 100 miles though. And so all of that kind of accumulated into a big bone injury in the early 2019 that kind of sidelined me for about 2 years, because I feel like that was accumulation of years of misuse of my body. And it wasn't just a bone injury, right? It was a huge bone injury that was from years of misuse and years of really poor biomarkers and poor recovery and poor bone health and all of these things that made the recovery process really awful. And so, coming out of that, again, slow journey to recover and finally find myself in running again. But it required just a ton of like evaluating my relationship with fueling, making sure I was fueling enough, backing off from really hard workouts or really crazy mileage if I had to, because realizing that maybe I couldn't do all of that anymore if I wanted to actually be able to compete in the sport again. And so, yeah, again, emphasize that it's not a fast process. I feel like my talk about 2022 Western states emphasizes that it's always a learning process, right? Like you could think that you've been on the right trajectory for 3 years and then you have a little thing that bumps you off your course and all of a sudden you have to relearn and change some of your habits again because you realize that, oh, actually I was a little off course and I didn't realize it until this big thing happened. And now I need to, reevaluate my relationship with food or relationship with training and make sure that I'm on the right path again.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like I've had a close up sideline seat to some of that. And it's been really cool to watch the evolution and the growth, maturity. And then it's one thing to do it for yourself. And then it's another to do it the way you're doing it, which is like, I'm going to share it. I'm going to teach it. I'm going to go back to school to learn it. And I'm going to help others. I'm going to talk about it on a podcast, all this stuff where it's like very not in a silo. And it's like, it's awesome. So thank you for that. You talked about in the past, your definition of success was specifically tied to like not getting your period and metrics like that don't indicate performance, don't indicate health, et cetera. But that was the lesson that you had learned and that's what you were seeing. And so of course it makes sense that that's sort of where the beacon was for you. Fast forward to today. How do you define success?
This is a great question. Yeah, I think right now my definition of success is how I act as a human. So if I'm having meaningful interactions with my friends, if I feel happy and feel really excited about things, and then, that relates to performance. So how I'm running and, I'm faster now than I ever was when I was underfueling and all of these things. And so I think now I can actually look at my performance and say critically, like, am I getting faster? Am I getting better? And, that's what performance is, not like, oh, am I eating less? Like, right. No, like if you can actually see performance increasing, that's pretty cool. And that should be how you measure your performance. It shouldn't be these other arbitrary things that, people think equal performance. You have to find how to get to your optimal performance. And then the other things will sort themselves out.
Love it. So you also have a podcast. You've been doing it for a while now.
Yeah, a little over a year.
Very cool. Where did that idea come from? First, what is the podcast? Where can we find it? Who are your co-hosts?
Yeah, so I launched the Trail Society podcast with my co-hosts, Corinne Malcolm and Hillary Allen. We're kind of under the Free Trail umbrella, and you can find us on anywhere you listen to podcasts like Spotify, iTunes, whatever you guys listen on. And, Dylan actually gave me the idea after working with him on some of a women's health tutorial we created for Free Trail. And I had interacted with both Corinne and Hillary on numerous occasions and knew that they kind of shared a similar mindset to me. And so we kind of came together to provide a space for athletes that kind of aims to start to change that narrative around sport by both discussing like the science and also by highlighting new voices and new experiences in the space to kind of show that there are a lot of different experiences and that maybe that narrative we've been using to drive our training for so many years is actually wrong. And maybe actually a lot of people don't do it that way or are going through the same problems that we're going through. And so, that was kind of our goal with Trail Society. And it kind of stemmed out of my experiences with, overtraining, underfueling, and also my experience in trail where I encountered other women who were going through the same thing. all the time. And I would see women come into the sport for a year and be amazing and then have to be out of the sport for years because they were going through, disordered eating or having slews of injury and all of these things because we were all fed the same narrative. And so I really just wanted to start to change that narrative through all of these things so that we could try to create a future of sport for women where the narrative is encouraging healthy training and discouraging like these crazy, arbitrary metrics like body image or body weight or fueling and all these things that don't indicate performance.
Very cool. And a topic I'm always curious to talk about or interested to talk about is the sponsorship aspect of pro sports, podcasting, being a creator, whatever you want to call it. I sit in an interesting place where I work for a brand and I have a podcast and a small social following, and I can see it with that angle. You check one of those boxes, but also a different box as a pro athlete. So you have a really unique view from that regard that many of your competitors on the trails don't. So I'm curious your perspective as both a creator and a pro athlete, where I'm guessing you're approaching or being approached by brands similarly for both hats you're wearing, but what is your experience with that?
Yeah, so I guess from the athlete lens, when it comes to sponsorships, I'm really looking for sponsors to want to support me as an athlete and not necessarily as a content creator and influencer. And so I try to push those sponsorships to one side and really keep those true to me as an athlete and acknowledging that, I will create content because I use your product and all this stuff, but that is not my main role as like a sponsored athlete for you. But, another thing on that side is that we're in a day and age where that is becoming, social media, influencer marketing is huge, right? And so a lot of companies, even if they are sponsoring you as an athlete, are making that more of a request now. And so just trying to keep that in check where it's not, feeling inauthentic to myself and it's not, flooding my feed with a ton of different posts and all these things that make me feel really annoying to my followers. That's kind of what I try to keep in check for those. And then, as my hat as content creator, podcast host, again, we're still not going to work with brands who are demanding like way too much ad space or really monotonous ads that don't feel genuine. And so there we really look for brands who are letting us, tell our audience about that brand in our own unique way. And also they're a brand that we believe in. So, we've turned down a lot of different brands that have wanted to work with us just because we wouldn't use the products or we didn't believe in the products because I don't know. I would never want to have to talk about something that I never use.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And it's it's an interesting position to be in where some people need it to pay rent or put food on their table or whatnot. And that's their full-time job. And it's seemingly a little bit harder to say no to things. Whereas I talked about it a lot this past summer where, I don't know, I turned down 3 or 4 brand partnerships that just didn't feel right to me. They weren't products I used, et cetera, but it was thousands of dollars on a monthly basis that would have been nice to have. But I feel like once you muddy the waters in terms of going a little too far in terms of things that you don't actually use, but you're just looking for the paycheck, you can't come back from that.
No.
And you're only as good as your trust and your authenticity. And to me, that's the most important thing. If I'm asking someone to spend their money on something, it damn well better be something that I would spend my money on.
Exactly. Yeah. If someone comes up to me and are like, oh my gosh, I used your code, I'm getting this thing. And if I don't feel a sense of joy for them and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't want to feel that way. And I think there's some brands that I could work with that, again, would pay, but I would feel very guilty pushing them on people because either I don't believe in them or I don't think they're worth the money or something like that. And so, yeah, I'm with you. It's definitely a fine line. And again, I think I'm speaking at this from a position of privilege because I don't need the money to pay rent or to buy food. And so I'm able to really vet my sponsors a lot more because right now the podcast is kind of a side hustle. that does not pay rent. And, I'd rather it not pay rent if that means we can keep credibility and, avoid sponsors from brands that we don't agree with.
Do you have a vision for the podcast in the future?
I would love it to continue to grow to be, something that we can take on the road and partner with other people in different cities to, bring live experiences and also bring in other knowledgeable experts and make it like kind of a symposium where we really discuss the nuances of sport. Maybe we talk to different high school teams, and would love it to just be this conversation that extends beyond a podcast and is able to, interact with the community in person. Because obviously, like, that's one of my favorite parts, and really just have better conversation in person. Because I think, my reach is not that great. But when you have a small reach, the people are very dedicated, and they'll pass your reach on to their friends, and they'll pass them on to their friends, because you're building credibility with the smaller group, and you're like gaining really, really, really dedicated followers. And so that would be kind of my goal. And then just to continue to, bring on really interesting people who have different opinions than us, to kind of highlight those voices as well.
Very cool. It's so interesting. So many brands are going one of two ways. They're either going really strong on events and things like that, and then others are not touching events, and like event managers are no longer with jobs. And then on the flip side, like, brands are hiring ambassadors or podcasters or whatnot to execute these like very detailed campaigns. And it's like it's really interesting where it's this massive pivot, and it's hard to understand like who is going to do what. Like it's not predictable at all, which is really interesting.
Yeah, totally. I think that we are in a space of, we're in flux right now, right? We're kind of like, will it happen this way or will it go this way? I don't think both will happen, at least not to the degree of one of the other. So yeah, I agree.
How did what's the dynamic between the three of you? How do you pick ideas, what to talk about? How do you propose brand partner? Like what's there are so many podcasts that have one host or sometimes a co-host. I think it's really unique to have three.
Yeah. I'd say because it's kind of my baby project, I do a lot of the, administrative stuff. I mostly am the face to the sponsors to talk through, talk to them for the initial conversation of like what they're about, what they want to sponsor us for, all that stuff. And then I kind of relay it to the girls and we kind of discuss it as a whole. Just so, as you can imagine, scheduling 3 people is really hard. Yeah. So I think we're really stoked when we can all be on the podcast. And so until it is more of a full-time gig, it's like hard to expect everyone to be able to make all of these calls. And so it's typically a vetting process. And I spearhead that. And then, Corinne is the moderator. So I'll go in or Corinne will go in and we'll kind of tag team the overview for the week. So we'll pull in stories, we'll pull in, outlines of things that are interesting. We'll bring in the race results. We'll outline whatever the topic is, or we'll outline the interview, and Corinne kind of comes in and builds in transitions and questions that she's going to kind of use because she's kind of the moderator. And then Hillary can come in and add stuff if she wants to as well. And then for the interview stuff, that's a little bit more involved. And again, right now we're small. So typically 1 or 2 or 3 of us will make the interview, because typically, again, scheduling 3 plus an interviewee is tough to actually make it work within a time frame. And so then what we've been doing as of now is I'll go and listen to the interview, then break it out by topics, and then we'll kind of rehash the interview together. And then I splice them all back together. So right now I do a lot of it, but again, it's kind of my baby project. And it's hard to coordinate 3 people to do every single thing, which I think would also be kind of a waste of everyone's time. So it's
What's
a good
been the most surprising?
balance.
What's been the most surprising part of it?
I think the most surprising part has been how dedicated some followers are to me. I guess I didn't realize that we would have as strong of a following and as dedicated of a following as we do. And so, going to races or going to a mountain town, I'm pretty much always confronted by someone who listens to it. And that is really cool. And lately I've been experiencing younger athletes coming up to me, which is probably one of my biggest goals, is to reach that audience. So to realize that we're finally maybe reaching those younger athletes who are in high school or lower levels of college is really cool to me, because I think that's where the narrative needs to start changing the most.
To that point, fast forward 10 years, it's 2020, it's 2030.
2034?
Yeah, math is hard. 2034, anyway, 10 years, 2033. What do you, wow, that, I was going to say Mondays are hard, but it's Thursday. Anyway, what are you really proud? What are you really proud of? Thursdays are hard. Yes.
I mean, in 10 years, I'm probably stoked that I'm a physician. So that journey is extremely long, but I would say that I will be most proud of being able to interact with the community in a way that I am constantly being able to impact, female and males perceptions of training and increasing their health and wellness. And whether that's through being a practicing physician or going to events and giving talks, that would kind of be my goal. And yeah, it seems, it's not very simple. It's very high level goal, but I would love to be building my way to making some big, like, institutional changes in the sport of running, or in just sport in general.
So similar to how training doesn't happen in a day or overnight, a goal like that takes, small chipping away at it day by day by day. How do you envision that happening on over the next decade?
Well, I think you've kind of hit that spot on. I do think it feels like it's a little bit of a chipping away every day. And sometimes that feels like you're not doing anything, even though you're slowly working there. So I think right now, a lot of it is taking initiative while I have this free time to, lead studies with fellow scientists in this area so that I can gain credibility in the research lens while I'm getting ready to go back to medical school. So then I can gain credibility in the medical lens, and just slowly, contributing more and more to this community, whether it's through articles or podcasts or scientific studies that then I can debunk or, digest for the population so they actually understand what the scientific study says. Because, I mean, I've been shocked at how many studies there are out from the 80s or beyond that discuss, low energy availability or body disordered eating and body image issues and all of these things in athletes that aren't discussed, that were never discussed, right? And I think that it just the scientific community is absolutely amazing and they do amazing work. But I think the translation to the general population so that they know that, maybe a narrative they're being fed is completely wrong, would be really, really helpful. And so, yeah, I think it's just slowly, advocating for myself, saying yes to things that I know will directly impact the community and also add, credibility or just experience to my resume in the space. It's kind of like what I've been doing to kind of chip away.
Very cool. And who are your role models that they're paving the road?
Great question. I'd say like Dr. Emily Krauss, Dr. Megan Roche are definitely some role models in the medical field because they both are, leading the FASTER program at Stanford, who looks at female and male athletes directly and is aiming to change the narrative through science for them as well. So they have very similar goals. They're both stellar physicians and stellar researchers who kind of, are spearheading this scary goal together. They're also runners and they still make time for running and athletics and all that stuff that makes them happy as well. And then I would say the other person that is still a role model would be like Dr. Kelly Elliott Sale. So she's out of the UK. And, it was Kirsty, sorry, not Kelly. But she is one of my role models because I feel like she has gained her voice and is now kind of the reigning expert in all things female physiology and is really just bringing it to light in digestible ways that I think is really important.
So for someone who's listening to all of this and they're like, I want to learn more about everything she's saying, where would someone start?
Oh man.
and they don't have a science or medical background?
That is a really good question. I would say that what Faster program at Stanford's doing is actually very digestible. They are basically taking the science and breaking it down in very digestible Instagram posts that I think are very digestible by every girl and boy. They also have a video tutorial that you can sign up to have your team take, that basically teaches young girls about all of the negative outcomes associated with poor training and underfueling, in a very digestible way, using, really stellar athletes as their spokesmen, or spokespeople. And I feel like that's a really good way to kind of interact with the space. But I'd say also just reaching out to someone who talks about it to have them discuss it with you is like also super, super easy, and they'll be able to answer whatever questions you have.
Very cool. What are you most proud of today?
I think that I am most proud of, I think, just the space that I'm creating for female athletes to grow up in. I've definitely, again, re-emphasizing my small but loyal community. I've received countless messages of people saying that, like, just hearing me talk about certain things have changed their trajectory, have saved their lives, all of these things. And I think that's just, you can't really beat that, So
Yeah.
I think if I have to be proud of something, which I'm a very harsh critic, so this is a hard question for me, I'd say is that community that I'm fostering, is that, it's that small level community where you actually can have an impact, and you see the results by interacting with the community and hearing their stories.
What I find to be really fascinating is that, so I've had a lot of conversations with really high performing people, and people who would be conventionally considered very successful. They've won a race, they've won a gold medal, blah, blah, blah. All these people define success and pride and growth and all this stuff around like really subjective topics. So things that are entirely within your control. Like if you don't create that place for young girls and other athletes, like that's on you. It's not because somebody else like beat you in a race. It's not a metric that you don't have control over. And I first sort of like poked at this with a conversation with Vanessa Fraser that I've referenced a million times now, back in March of 2020. And I asked her the same question. I said, fast forward 10 years, what are you really proud of? And she said, getting better and making people around me better. And I was like, wait a minute, training like to go to Olympics. You wouldn't be proud of like winning a gold medal in the 5,000 or something. And then I asked probably 100 more people, and I just had a chat with Brad Stulberg on this as well. And I was like, Brad, your life's work is like diagnosing high performers and breaking down the components of elite performance in a variety of different arenas. Like, I want to run a bunch of ideas by you. And so I ran this by him, and he was like, yep, totally makes sense. That's exactly what I've found as well. And the people who are categorically most conventionally successful often follow this, and it gets back to like process versus outcome, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And I've had like lengthy conversations on process versus outcome and metrics versus not metrics. And I talked at length with Kat Bradley and Kate Grace on this topic, and like really loved their answers around like both are essential. And one is a like daily carrot that gets dingled in front of your face and helps you like stay the path. And the other is the North Star kind of a vibe.
Yeah. And I think like we all start off with that pie in the sky goal, right? It's like, oh, I want to make the Olympics, then I'll be happy, or I'll be really successful then. And I slowly think we all learn that the journey is more that matters, and not necessarily that huge goal, but that like by acknowledging the journey and appreciating the journey and having these like bigger concepts be your goal, all of that will let you accomplish these other goals, right? And so then it won't feel like this never-ending finish line. It's like, no, I'm living based off my morals. I'm living based off my daily goals. And so that means like if I go and win Western States, like that's going to be amazing, but that doesn't define me, and my life's not going to change after that. Like it's all part of my bigger goal. And I think that's just a healthy way to look at it, because otherwise, you're going to be chasing these never ending finish lines being like, oh, I need to win this. And when I do, I'll feel happy. And you win it and you don't feel any different.
I totally agree. So I had a conversation, I guess this past summer with Gwen Jorgensen, and Gwen trained her whole life to go to the Olympics, and she went to the Olympics and won a gold medal in triathlon. And I was like, not interested in that. What happened the next day? And she was like, well, honestly, I was like afraid. I wasn't afraid of failure. I was afraid of success. Like what happens next? And I won't pretend that I knew her at all in those years, but I've gotten to know her very well lately. And we talk a lot, and she just seems more happy and more fulfilled than ever before. And she's not winning gold medals. She still wants to, but it's not the only thing. And I find sometimes I have a tough time with this podcast and guest selection, because I find that there's like an earned or implied knowledge that people like you or Gwen or like those types of people have, and people are willing to listen to someone who is like doing it professionally. And then on the flip side, like there are people who, they're training for a 7-hour marathon, and their goals are just as valid. Their lessons are just as valid. And like, we need to learn from those people as well, because they have an entirely different perspective that is like whole and valid. And so it's so cool to hear like similar stories from so many different types of people, all saying the same thing, but in a very different way.
Yeah. You should have brought myself on in 2015 though. And we could have compared and contrasted my goals, because then I might have said something a lot more concrete.
I know. And it's like, so a question I like to ask people is like, what would you say to a prior version of yourself? And it's often someone who's like been through something or like, and the reason I ask the question isn't because I find the answer interesting. I find that there are so many people that like that answer is speaking directly into somebody's soul. So I'm going to ask the question, what would you say to Keely of 2015?
Yeah, I'd say just make sure you're enjoying the process, because you might not ever get to the finish line. And then if you do, the finish line is not going to change your life. So you have to be enjoying the process with like these bigger life goals in mind, and not just, like I must go to med school or I must win this race, because when those happen, your life continues after them, and you need to be able to, be happy during the journey to it if it doesn't happen, and also during the journey to it if it does happen. Because like Gwen said, like it happens and your life goes on, and you need to be able to come off of that, because that's huge if it does happen, but it also is not the end of your life, right? So it's like trying to enjoy the process instead of just thinking about the performance outcomes later.
I just got the chills. That was amazing. Keely, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I'll let you get back to your coffee and the rest of the day here. But again, thank you as always, and excited to hopefully share some miles with you later in the new year.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan. Happy to help you out.
Of course.